So what we're going to do is we're going to try GraphQL out. I'm going to use Hasura for trying GraphQL out, and I'm going to run Hasura on Heroku. So I'm going to walk you through what is happening as I do it. So I'm going to click on this deploy to Heroku button. And what this will do, so I was on the Hasura.io docs, and then from the Hasura.io docs, I clicked on the Heroku button. What we will see here is the Heroku page. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually deploying an application, a GraphQL server on Heroku. So let's give this a title, GraphQL Postman, right? And then let's deploy this. So again, what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of speeding through the typical deployment of a server process, right? So if you're familiar with it, you need to kind of get a VM, you run you run your server on a VM, right? You get a database. We've just kind of integrated that into a one-click so that I get a Postgres database and I get a GraphQL and I get a GraphQL server as well. So this takes a few seconds and then this gets deployed, and that's what we'll take a look at soon. In the meantime, let me open this page as well here, which is perfect. Cool. So that is what we call the Hasura console. So that's kind of a UI that will help us manage our GraphQL API and kind of visualize it and see what's happening, right? So this is our GraphQL endpoint, right? Just like you have REST API endpoints, this is going to be a GraphQL API endpoint. You can see that it's an HTTP endpoint with a domain name and an endpoint that says /v1/GraphQL. So that's where we'll be sending our GraphQL requests. And let's take our first GraphQL. And let's make our first GraphQL query to see what that looks like. So what I'm going to do to set a backend up is I'm going to go create a table via the Hasura console. So let's call this a users table and do some simple database stuff. So I'm going to go create ID and then name, put that text here, primary key is ID, just standard database stuff, right? And I created a table. I'm going to go add some names here. So let's say Tanmai, and then let's say Sean. Who else is there on chat? See Greg there. Let's see this one, Greg in. All right. So I just inserted.
Sorry to interrupt. Would you mind just zooming in maybe one?
Of course.
Awesome.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's definitely a bit better.
Cool. All right. It's going to screw up a little bit with the UI, but I'm hoping that.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. No worries. As long as you folks can see. So I've just done some standard database stuff, right? Created a simple table, added in some rows, made a spelling mistake, just typical stuff that you're doing when you're dealing with data, right? And so now I can start making GraphQL queries, right? So what Hasura has done is it's kind of used that database schema and it's created a GraphQL API on top of it for us automatically. If you were building your own GraphQL server, you would have built your own GraphQL service that would have talked to the database and created a GraphQL API. So we've short-circuited that process with Hasura. And now what we'll get to do is the fun part, which is actually try GraphQL out. So the first thing that you'll notice is this kind of sidebar on the left, which is called, which is a GraphQL Explorer. And here we have something called GraphQL. It's another open source tool that was released along with GraphQL. So here what I can do is I can make a query and I can say I want users, ID, and name. I make this query and I get this result here. Let me just walk you through what's happening here. So first, this here, what you see is GraphQL. That language in which I'm writing stuff down, that is GraphQL, right? And you can see that when I made a request for users, ID and name, I got ID and name. Let me see if I remove ID from here, right? I get just name, right? Let me try something else. Let's see if I can sort this by ID ascending order. It's not interesting. Let's sort this by the name in the ascending order instead. Right? And so I get that. So I'm making a bunch of API calls, and you can see that this is kind of the syntax. This is the GraphQL syntax, and the response that I get is just standard JSON, right? The nice thing about GraphQL is that I get to kind of, I'm kind of requesting for the shape of the JSON that I want. You know what I mean? If you see this JSON result here, right? Imagine that I took all of the value stuff out of JSON and I only had the keys. That's kind of what a GraphQL query looks like. It looks like kind of the keys, right? And so I'm making this request here. I can also filter for stuff. So for example, I can say where ID, is equal to 1, right? and then I get this result. So these GraphQL queries, right? Or I can make a here I'm fetching for I'm requesting multiple users, right? So I can even do greater than. Let's see ID greater than 1, so I'll get on get, which makes sense. I can get a single result, so let me change that to user by okay. I say ID is 1. And then let me just walk you through this query. So this query that I'm running here, right, the various queries that I showed you, the REST equivalents for those queries would have been something like having this endpoint, right? And then having a query that was something like, get slash, it would have been something like, get slash users question mark ID is equal to 1, right? And then if I wanted to do a sort, I would do order by, something like a name, right? That's kind of what the syntax would have been like. There is no kind of way to choose what fields I want, right? Because I was able to choose ID and name, and I was able to get exactly the data that I wanted, which was convenient. That's the bit that starts becoming inconvenient to the rest, right? Like maybe I have to do something like and fields equal to ID comma name, right? It starts becoming complicated. I'm going to show you a slightly more complicated example where I'm going to fetch nested objects, and you're going to see how mapping that to a REST thing is possible. It's just inconvenient, and it's not a great API to use, right? So let's try a slightly more interesting example. What I'm going to do is, because I don't want to sit here and create lots of tables, I'm just going to connect directly to the database, and then I am going to import some data in the database. So you can see my terminal now, I hope. Oops. Let me just connect to the database directly. And here you can see that's the table that I created in the database, right? I'm just going to do a database import. I'm going to pretend that I had this existing database, right? Because I don't want to go and create the whole database from scratch. So let me just run that import. So it's just running a database import. So it's creating a bunch of tables, right? It's going to start inserting some data and whatnot. Just to show you kind of what database I'm importing and creating, let me show you what that is. I'm putting in a music database, right? So here I have a music database, right? I have artists and albums, right? Every artist has a bunch of albums. Every album has a bunch of tracks, right? Pretty straightforward stuff that you would usually expect in a typical kind of data model. So now let me go and see what Hasura says. So if I click on Hasura, Hasura says, hey, you've got these tables inside your database. Do you want to convert them to a GraphQL API? I am all for it. So I'm just going to convert all of them to a GraphQL API. And so now what Hasura is doing is it's going to the database, it's getting all of the names of the tables, the types, right? And it's creating the GraphQL API automatically based on that. Hasura also allows me to kind of create relationships based on foreign keys. So I can do that as well to kind of just speed things up. Otherwise, I would have to go and create relationships between data models manually, which I can do. It's just a little more fun to have this process automated, right? So you can see there's a relationship from albums to artists, because each album has an artist, right? The music database album has an array of tracks, right? Each artist has multiple albums and stuff like that. So there's some stuff here, some data is starting to come in as well, right? Because the data import is running here. You can see that the data import is running as we speak. And now the nice thing is you'll see that I have this entire API on the side. So let's try making some queries. I can see artists, and here's again kind of the nice thing about GraphQL, right? I don't know what's in my API. But because every GraphQL server returns a schema of what is available in the API. That's kind of what makes GraphQL a really convenient API to consume. So here I can see all of the different fields that are available in the GraphQL API that I have, all right? And that's called an introspection query. You can make an introspection query to a GraphQL server to fetch the fields, right? You can even go look at the docs or stuff, and you can say, oh, what can I query? What is an album? An album is an ID, which is an integer, or a title, which is a string. And all this is auto-generated for any GraphQL server that you have. So let's go make a few queries. So I want artist, ID, and name. That's cool. I get a bunch of stuff. It's nice. I also want the albums of those artists. So let's go and make ID and title. And now, because I'm a rock kind of person, I'm just making that up. Let me filter for those artists who have at least some album with the word rock in it. So I want artists where album dot title. So let's see, artists where I'm going to use this UI to filter that. It's going to be a little easier. So where album title has the word rock in it. Let's see what this gives us, right? So cool. So we have AC/DC because there's Let There Be Rock. We have Deep Purple because Deep Purple has Deep Purple and rock, right? So I'm fetching those artists that have at least one album with the word rock in it. Now imagine this query in a REST API endpoint, right? It wouldn't be particularly neat because you'll have like, how would you represent kind of a complex argument style, right? It's hard, right? Whereas this is just kind of so much easier. I can even sort these albums I can do a nested sort. So I can say I want albums, artists and their albums, but the albums that I want, I want them to be sorted by their title. So now I get these albums, but now sorted by the title instead, right? By the title kind of alphabetically, right? So that's kind of the power of a GraphQL query. Let's take a quick look at another interesting feature that GraphQL has called subscriptions. So I think I should have some music tracks in my system now, right? So I have these music tracks. So I can make an aggregate query and say I want to get the count, right? So there's 368 now. If I run this query again, that gives me the total number of music tracks. You can see that this number changes when I run this query again. And that's because I'm importing data, right? And it's just an example of some data changing in the background. If I convert this to a subscription, you'll notice that the data is just changing live for me, right? Which is super cool. If you think about it as an application developer, right? It's all I need is a GraphQL client, which is actually underneath it, not doing anything particularly fancy. It's just taking this endpoint, it's making post requests to it, and the body of the post request is the query, and the response is the JSON. In the case of a subscription, it's a WebSocket. Instead of sending it over HTTP, it's a WebSocket connection, and I'm sending this as the body, and this is the response that I get. So pretty straightforward, not too much effort to do. I just use a GraphQL client. And then I just integrate these queries and subscriptions, and I fetch precisely the data, whether it's real time or not, and start integrating that in my application, right? So that's like a super quick introduction to GraphQL queries and subscriptions. GraphQL also has support for something called mutations that allow you to actually update stuff. I'm going to take a quick example of a mutation in the last 1 minute that I have. So let's do a mutation, and let's insert something. So let's insert an artist, and let's say that this artist's name is Tanmai, because I always wanted to be a musician. I don't know how I got sucked into this whole engineering business. And I probably got sucked in because I'm not particularly good at any music. But there you go. What you see here is that I was able to insert this data, and I fetched the response that I want. So I fetched the exact fields that I wanted in my response. This is an equivalent of a post, right? Or a put where not actually put, a post where I insert an artist, and this would have been my JSON payload, right? And I would have gotten this response. So it's a query. So queries and mutations are kind of the two sides of reads and writes, and I can use mutations to update, delete, run a workflow, whatever, right? That's the general convention, right? So you have queries and mutations. All right, so that's my time, and I'm going to stop here, and I have a few more seconds and a few easy questions. I can answer them. Let's see. Greg, is it typically you would have one GraphQL endpoint? Yes, you would have one GraphQL endpoint. Typically, you might have more. Sometimes if you have multiple versions of your GraphQL API, although that's not a usual thing. And that was my only question that I'm going to take. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, folks, because I'm out of time. Let me just link you to my Twitter. Always open to questions and helping you out with GraphQL or any other questions that you might have related to Hasura as well. I'm done, Sean.
No, that was awesome. Thanks so much. I don't know if you got the chance to see. I think the room will stay open for another minute or so. Yeah, a few questions in Slido as well. So yeah, I mean, I love that you put your Twitter in there. Hopefully people can take the opportunity to chat. That was sweet. I just love seeing how quickly you were able to spin that up and show us some cool example.
Absolutely. Pleasure being here.
Yeah, same. And for those of you that are still here, I'm just going to hype the fireside chat with Dr. Ochoa coming up. That is happening right now. So let's head over to the main stage and check that out. I'm pumped.